Hey guys, Excoundrel here. I have got some relaxing music on. I am ready to talk about the items in Teamfight Tactics, and we're going to go through them in pretty big detail. So that's why I've done a more relaxing background track to go with this video, because I want you guys to just kind of listen to it and kind of get the information that you need, because it's going to be moderately long and it's not going to be particularly exciting. It's not like we're going to be looking at gameplay footage. We're going to be talking through the items, telling you what they do and where they are useful, so that you guys can decide when you find items what you want to combine. I'll also talk about an item tier list at the end, which I'll put a link to in the description. So if you know what the items do and you just want to have a look at the tier list, I will go down and put that tier list in the description. There is one on the site that I'm using, tftTactics.gg, which I'll put a link to both this page and the tier list page, and I'll talk about those items that are on the tier list, whether I agree or disagree. But mostly we're going to go through the items and talk about where they're useful. It's going to take a little while. This is a long video. So if you don't want to listen to all of the items, I will put some timestamps to skip through, like, you know, I'll basically put A to Z, and I'll talk about which letters we're at certain timestamps, so you guys can go and see that. The reason I'm doing this is there's a lot of new players, and this is the most requested guide that I've had, figuring out what items do and where they are useful and which ones you should be building. That's basically what I get asked all the time. One of the skills of TFT compared to other auto battlers is that you need to know where you can apply certain items, and you've got to make use of the components that you've got and make the best items that you get based on the components that you get. So let's talk through it. Let's start with Blade of the Ruined King. Wearer is also a Blade Master. So this is a spatula item, so obviously spatulas can be, I would say spatulas are a little bit less impactful than they have been in the previous sets, but Blade of the Ruined King is a kind of an item which I think has limited use. So basically it turns you into a Blade Master. So it turns whatever unit that you put onto it into a Blade Master. So really you want to be giving this item to a unit who has good basic attacks. Generally, you want to put it on a carry that isn't already a Blade Master, that you want to basic attack a bit more. Because remember, the Blade Master perk is that there is a chance to deal 2 extra basic attacks. And so obviously, if you put this on something like Jinx, who has very big impactful basic attacks, this could be a really, really good item for her. However, there aren't many Blade Master centered compositions right now. It's more of a side synergy, so no one really bases their composition around Blade Masters in total, so I'm not sure how useful this item is in the grand scheme of things, and I probably wouldn't be looking to build it on the outset because there aren't many super powerful Blade Master compositions. That could change, obviously. I definitely envision a world where you get a Blaster Blade Master composition where you have 4 Blasters with Jinx as a Blade Master, and then you just have Blade Masters as your front line. That I can actually clearly see that comp in my head, maybe being something in the future that we look at, but there isn't really any major Blade Master compositions to work with right now, so Blade of the Ruined King is not like a priority, but I think it's definitely a decent spatula item, and especially if we get either Kale or Jinx orientated Blade Master compositions coming out, we may see Blade of the Ruined King used a bit more. Bloodthirster, it combines out of Negatron Cloak and BF Sword, giving you some attack damage and some magic resist. Remember, whenever you combine an item together, you get the components' basic stats as well. So Bloodthirster will give you 15 attack damage and it will give you 25 magic resist. And the benefit of Bloodthirster is that all attacks heal for 50% of damage. That is not abilities, so Hextech Gunblade differs from Bloodthirster. This is just basic attacks. Bloodthirster, I would say, is not a particularly good item, just because if you're looking to get some magic resist for a carry, you often are going to give them Dragon's Claw, which is pretty much far superior. However, it is a good secondary item if you are struggling to find some sort of magic resist for a carry, and if you only have a BF Sword and a Negatron Cloak, and you know that you're not going to get a chance to find another Negatron Cloak, combining a Bloodthirster for a carry who focuses on basic attacks like Xin Zhao, like Jinx, like Kale even, is not an awful idea. However, it's not a particularly good item, but it's an item that's designed for carries who have big hitting basic attacks. It's not really designed for people who focus on their abilities. Bramble Vest builds out of 2 chain vests, giving you 50 armor overall. Negates bonus damage from incoming critical hits, which is fantastic. And on being hit by a basic attack, it deals between 140 and 200 magic damage to all nearby enemies, once every 2.5 seconds maximum. Very good with tanks, probably the best tank item in the game right now. You put this on someone like Xin Zhao in a protector composition, you put this on someone like Leona in a cybernetics composition, you put it on any of your tanks who are designed to take damage. You will need to put it on someone who has a high survivability as a base, So someone like Leona who's got natural survivability built in, or you're putting it on someone that you're stacking as a tank with something like a Warmogs. Overall though, so for instance, this is not a bad item on a mech composition, by the way. So you could put this with a GA, a Warmogs, and a Bramble Vest onto a super mech who has a lot of HP, and actually Bramble Vest can be a really good item for that particular unit, especially as it generally tends to have a lot of units crowd around it. So this is not a bad item for mechs, for frontline tanks, for Xin Zhao in a protected composition, but generally if you can get two chain vests and you have a tank that you want to use this on, it is a good item. Celestial Orb. Wear against the Celestial trait. Not really useful, if I'm honest with you. Not many compositions hinge on hitting a certain Celestial threshold, so and you can actually just slot 2 Celestials in some compositions anyway, so I wouldn't even recommend building this. I don't think it's a particularly good item. Chalice of Fervor, giving you some mana and some magic resist. Whenever the holder casts a spell, give all nearby allies 20 mana. Well, to make use of this, you'd have to have someone that has a very, very low mana value anyway. Remember, every champion in League of Legends, in TFT, generally has a different level of mana that they need to hit to cast their ability. So you'd want to give this to someone who casts their ability fairly often. However, this is just strictly inferior to Seraphs, because usually when you want someone to cast their ability over and over again, that is usually going to be a carry that you want to apply your items to. So you're not really looking to buff everyone around you, you're looking to buff yourself, and that's why Seraphs is usually the item of choice over Chalice of Fervor. There might be a composition where Chalice of Fervor becomes useful. I could see this potentially in a Star Guardian composition where they're giving each other mana anyway, so then they cast this ability and then they get extra mana so that everybody's constantly casting their ability. That's a potential, but right now, no one's really found a great use for Chalice of Fervor. Dark Star Heart, Wearer is also a Dark Star. This is a good item to have if you are running 2 Dark Stars in your composition. So for something like the Jace Vanguard composition, giving Jace a Dark Star's Heart with Mordekaiser and Karma on the field is a fantastic item. However, it's again not an item that you generally tend to aim for. However, if you pick up a Spatula early on and you go down that Jace composition with 2 Dark Stars, it is a pretty solid one. But again, no one's really building pure Dark Star Heart compositions at a high elo. So I wouldn't say it's something that... I think it's something that you would get incidentally, or if you have a Spatula and you know that you're going a composition that is using some Dark Star champions, it can be fairly useful. Deathblade. Whenever the wearer kills or participates in killing an enemy, gains 15 attack damage for the remainder of combat, and it starts with 1 stack. This can stack up to any number of times. So you get a base 45 attack damage from Deathblade, which is great, but it's definitely more of a win more item. You already need to be getting off to a good start to make Deathblade worth it. This is good on someone like, for instance, Jinx or something Kale. It can be good on Misfortune, kind of. It's generally pretty solid in a blaster composition, but I would say in a lot of ways it is inferior to Titan's Resolve. Titan's Resolve is probably just a better version of Deathblade, and there are items that you would rather create than Deathblade with a BF sword over Deathblade. There is lots of items that you'd rather create with BF Sword over Deathblade, which we'll talk about in a moment. So it's an item that, honestly, unless you're just left with 2 BF Swords at the end, you're never going to be able to combine them into anything else. It's more of a last resort BF Sword item. Demolitionist Charge. The wearer is also a Demolitionist. This is very, very, very good for a specific composition. This is very good for Aurelian Soul. This basically means that whenever he casts his missiles ability, he stuns everybody that he hits. And alongside Gangplank, if you put Gangplank in your composition, it just makes your entire Rebel composition a complete stun lock comp. So, very strong. It's a super, super, super good item for Aurelian Soul specifically, but I wouldn't say that it has many other uses unless you are randomly adding a Gangplank to your composition later on and you want to make someone a Demolitionist because you're not going to run Ziggs, for instance, or Rumble. However, if you are... Outside of playing a Gangplank carry style composition, so for instance, this is good with Misfortune. If you're running like a Blaster Space Pirate comp where you have Misfortune and Gangplank, and you give this to Misfortune, it's a pretty good item in that respect. But otherwise, it's not a particularly strong item outside of either buffing Gangplank or buffing Aurelian Soul. Dragon Claw. gain 50% resistance to magic damage. Basically reduces all magic damage by 50%, which is actually just broken. It's one of the best magic defensive items in the game. Very, very good for Xin Zhao and protectors, but it generally has to go on someone that's going to get some kind of sustain out of their build anyway, or you're just looking to prevent someone getting completely bursted out by some sort of high magic damage ability. So pretty good on someone like Jinx if you have to run, if you're going up against heavy magic damage and you can't fit Mystics in your build, for instance. But generally, this can be superseded by Mystics, especially if you're running 4. However, in something like the Xin Zhao composition, where you're not going to run many Mystics, this is just a good item to put on Xin Zhao, for instance. Force of Nature, 2 spatulas. It's always going to be fantastic. If you get 2 spatulas and you're not planning on running a spatula-based composition for a unit, you absolutely want Force of Nature. If you get 2 spatulas, combine this instantly. This is a massive power spike, and at level 8 means you can have 9 units on the field. It is a really, really, really good item. This is one of the best items in the game. Frozen Heart. Nearby enemies' attack speed is slowed by 40%. Stacking this increases the radius of the effect, not the amount of the slow. Wouldn't say there are many attack speed focused compositions right now, and I don't think Frozen Heart is very good. I think it's a last resort item for a tank. You'd rather have Bramble Vest, you'd rather have lots of other different items like Titan's Resolve. It's not a particularly good item. Giant Slayer. Attacks deal additional 9% enemy max health as true damage. Absolutely insane. It's a tank shredder item. It's so good for Jinx. It's good for Lucian. It's good for Kayle. This is really good on anybody that's going to have either a high attack speed, for someone like Jinx, or anyone that's going to survive and deal lots of basic attacks. It's very, very, very good item. If you get this item, you want to try and build it, especially if you're building a blaster composition, because it's very strong. Guardian Angel. Wearer revives with 500 health after a 2-second delay. Brilliant item. Obviously, it's just a great item. It fits onto so many different units. It's really good at protecting one of your important carries. It's really good at bringing back a frontline member, like a Gangplank, like a Yasuo. It's great on. It's really good on Xin Zhao. It's just a great item in general. Guardian Angel is adaptable, and if you can get it early on, it can be a really good snowball item as well. Guinsoo's Rageblade. Attacks grant 5% attack speed, and it stacks infinitely. This is an item that I think is useless if you don't have a composition that is designed to sustain for a very long time. I don't mind this on Kayle, on Xin Zhao if I've already got Bramble Vest and Dragon's Claw. I don't mind it on Jinx if she's well protected in a Rebels composition, but like there are other items that you would rather put on them using these, like using Recurve Bow and using Needlessly Large Rod. But it is a good item, don't get me wrong. If you can get a Guinsoo's, it can be pretty strong. So don't completely write off Guinsoo's. Hand of Justice. On round start, either gain 50% more damage or 50 life on hit. Great on Lucian in Cybernetics. It is generally a pretty solid item for a lot of different types of carries. It's good for Yasuo in Rebels. It's good for Jinx if you don't have anything better. It's pretty good for Kayle as well. Just give this to anyone that focuses on basic attacks. Or even, for instance, Jace. 50% more damage is just like insane for his ability. Hand of Justice is in general a very good item. So I would consider using Hand of Justice. If you get a tier and a Brawler's Glove, consider building Hand of Justice. The 50% more damage is good for a lot of people. 50 life on hit is not always great, but for like backline carries with a high attack speed like Jinx, or for someone that's got kiting potential like Lucian, this is a really good item. Hextech Gunblade, heal for, I believe it's 25% of all damage dealt. I'm not sure, I'll have to double check. But 33% of all damage dealt. This is not a particularly good item apart from on Jace. I think really Jace is the only person that can use this item well in the game because he has a good mix of both basic attacks and a high damaging ability. Maybe Kayle could use this item when she levels up as well, but I wouldn't say this is a particularly good item outside of those types of carries. Infiltrator's Talons, where it is also an infiltrator. Good on a limited number of champions. Specifically, it's pretty solid in an Irelia cybernetic composition because it means that Irelia, once you get Echo, will jump to the back line and get a boost in attack speed. Otherwise, I would not recommend using Infiltrator's Talons in many other comps, but it is a good way of delivering a backline melee carry specifically to the backline. So, Infiltrator Talons, good on Irelia and Cybernetics, but there aren't many other compositions that make good use of this right now. Infinity Edge, 100% critical strike damage. Good on Shaco. It's pretty solid on someone like Jinx if she gets lucky and hits a critical strike with her basic attacks. It's better on Shaco though, and there are other items that you'd prefer to have on your backline carries, but Shaco makes great use of this item, so good if you're running infiltrators. Ionic Spark. Enemies within 3 hexes have their magic resist reduced by 25% when they cast a spell and they are zapped, taking magic damage equal to 20% of their mana. Brilliant item for a tank. Really good on Rakan and Protectors. Really good on your mech in a mech sorcerer or mech infiltrator composition. Really good on someone like Leona or Malphite. Anybody that's going to survive a long time and make use of Ionic Spark. It's good on Xin Zhao as well if you don't have anything better to put on him. But yeah, this is a really, really good item. Very high tier. Jeweled Gauntlet. The wearer's spells can critical strike. Great for Syndra in a sorcerer composition. Great for Aurelian Sol. Great for Gangplank. Great for Misfortune. This is a really, really good item on a lot of different units, but generally people who have big hitting abilities. I've given this to Jace in a Vanguard composition, and his ability deals just silly damage. So this is a good item as well. But think about it in this sense. It's people who have big hitting spells. The more damage the spell deals, the more benefit you're going to get out of Jeweled Gauntlet. So think either people who cast their abilities a lot, like Syndra or Aurelian Sol, or people who have really big abilities, like Misfortune, Gangplank, Jace. I sometimes give it to Ziggs early on, for instance. But yeah, just think about people who have big abilities. Last Whisper. Critical hits reduce the target's armor by 90% for 3 seconds. Not a particularly good item. Only good if you want to counter Vanguards. And if you're going up against Vanguards and you're running like a blaster composition, you could give this to Jinx and she'd be able to pretty much tear through a lot of the Vanguard's armor. But it's like an anti-Vanguard item, and I wouldn't say it's particularly good elsewhere. Locket the Iron Solari. Shields allies within 2 hexes for this amount of damage, so between 250 and 350 for 8 seconds. I would say that this used to be an insanely good item, but there were just better items from Chain Vest and Needlessly Large Rod, and you'd only ever combine these if you were desperate and you had these 2 components left over. The way you have to think about it, and what you're probably getting from this guide, is that actually it really depends on the 2 components and whether there are just better items that you can make with those particular components. For instance, with Needlessly Large Rod, I can make Jeweled Gauntlet, I can make Morellonomicon, I can make Rabadon's Death Cap, for instance. All of these are just better items than Locket of the Iron Solari. With Chain Vest, I can make things like, let's have a look, we can make Bramble Vest, we can make Guardian Angel, we can make, I think you can make Titan's Resolve. There are just better items that you can make from these 2 components. And that's what you need to think about when you're being delivered these components. What are the best items I can make for pretty much any scenario? And Locket of the Iron Solari is not the best item that you can make. Ludin's Echo. Spells deal 150, 175, 225 splash damage on hit. This item is okay. This item is good early game, and it drops off considerably in the late game. So this is really good if you want to snowball. So snowballing with a Ziggs, snowballing with an Ahri, for instance. But this item is not very good late game. And again, Tier and Needlessly Large Rod can build into better items. Morellonomicon. Spells deal burn damage equal to 18% of the enemy's maximum health over 10 seconds and prevent healing. Really, really good item versus Protectors. Really, really good item versus Celestials. In general is a pretty solid item for a lot of different units. I like this on Rakan. I like this on Mordekaiser in a Vanguard composition. You basically want to give this to anybody that has AoE spells. So Aurelian Sol makes good use of this, Gangplank makes good use of this. So anybody that has a spell that deals area of effect damage, you want to give Morellonomicon. It's a good snowball item as well. But yeah, good on Mordekaiser, good on Rakan, good on Aurelian Sol, good on Gangplank. Not particularly good on single target units. So I wouldn't use this on single target units. This is solid for anybody with area of effect, big hitting ability damage. As well as good for people who survive a long time. So Aurelian Sol in a Rebel composition, Mordekaiser in a Vanguard composition, they use Morellonomicon really well. Protector's Chest Guard, where it is also a Protector. Honestly, can't think of many times I'd want to build this outside of just getting it for free on a carousel and thinking, oh, I can make another Protector. There aren't many Protectors that I'd be like, yeah, I want to drop this Protector in favor of someone else. And it's a bit of a waste of a spatula, but if you get it in a Protector composition, it can be pretty useful. But otherwise, not the best item in the world. Quicksilver. The wearer is immune to crowd control. This is actually quite a good item. They're immune to crowd control for the first 16 seconds, I think, something like that. It's a really good item for a carry, especially a frontline carry like Xin Zhao. It's good for an infiltrator that's going to the backline and you don't want them to get locked up. It's generally just a good item for anybody that is going to be your carry and you think may be potentially at risk of getting CC'd early on. I like this on Xin Zhao, for instance, if I can't find a Dragon's Claw, because it gives me a bit of magic resist and also makes me immune to crowd control. Rabadon's Death Cap, where a spell power stat is amplified by 50%. Insanely good on anybody with a big hitting ability. Gangplank, Aurelian Soul, Misfortune. Anybody, again, that deals area of effect damage is going to benefit massively from Rabadon's. And someone like Jace, for instance, will benefit massively from Rabadon's, because he's just anybody that deals big damage with one ability or big AoE damage will benefit from Rabadon's Death Cap. It's a good item. It's maybe a little bit more limited in terms of usefulness, because there are certain units that use this better than others. But anybody with big AoE damage, or people like Jace, for instance, benefit from Rabadon's Death Cap really well. Rapid Fire Cannon, attack range is doubled. This used to be really useful, but is actually not that useful now. So yeah, I would never really recommend building Rapid Fire Cannon. Rebel Medal, where it is also a rebel. Really, really good if you're running a rebel-based composition, or you're running a composition that runs 2 rebels, for instance, like blasters maybe, and you want someone else to be a rebel so you can get that rebel buff. So for instance, if you're running a blaster brawler composition and you're running Malphite and Jinx, maybe you want 1 extra rebel in there. I know you can make Lucian a rebel, for instance, and then suddenly your Jinx and Lucian, they get a little bit of an attack damage bonus, which is actually really useful. So this is a useful item, but I wouldn't say that it is like necessary to build rebels, for instance. Red buff, attack steal 18% of the enemy's maximum health damage as burn damage and prevent healing. Basically the attack damage equivalent of Morellonomicon. Brilliant item. Really, really good item on lots of different carries. Echo, Jinx, you could give it to Kale. Anybody that is going to be either a blaster or an attack damage focused, basic attack focused carry, red buff is really solid on. A lot of people play it on Echo in Cybernetics as well, because he hits everybody with his ultimate that is on the field once, so that everybody gets a red buff stack applied, which is actually really good. It's also really good versus protectors. Redemption. On crossing below 25% health, heal on... This is useless. Honestly, Redemption used to be really strong, but it's basically useless now. Honestly, not good at all. I would never recommend building Redemption. Runan's Hurricane. Basic attacks fire an additional missile at 1 nearby enemy, dealing 60% of the wearer's attack damage and applying on-hit effects. Good. You know, I would give it to Jinx, for instance. I might give it to Kale. You would need to have an item that has an on-hit effect applied at the same time. So this goes well with something like Red Buff, for instance. So yeah, I think Runan's Hurricane is good. Again, there are items that I might want to build out of Recurve Bow and Negatron Cloak that are better than Runan's, but Runan's is a decent item. Seraph's Embrace. After casting their spell, wearer restores 20 mana. Brilliant item. It's very, very good for people with low mana thresholds for their ability. Now you need to look at your unit. If you've got a unit that takes 150 mana to cast their ability, Seraph's Embrace is going to be nigh on useless. But if you have someone that takes 50 mana or 70 mana, Seraph's Embrace is really, really useful. So someone like Syndra, someone like Aurelian Soul, anybody that has a low mana threshold and has a big ability to cast. I used it on Jace, for instance, and it was actually pretty good. So Seraph's Embrace is a solid item for anyone with a low mana threshold. It also gives you 40 mana to start off with, so you cast your ability more quickly, which is always useful. It's really good for Misfortune as well. Shroud of Stillness. When combat begins, shoot a beam straight ahead that affects enemies' first spell cast, increasing them at max mana by 40% until they cast. Hit or miss. I wouldn't say it's fantastic. It can be a nuisance, but I don't think it's a game changer. And again, there are items that I would rather build out of Chain Vest and Sparring Gloves. Spear of Shojin. After casting their first ability, wearers gain 18% of its max mana per attack. This is basically the other equivalent to Seraph's Embrace, where if you have a high mana threshold, so Xin Zhao, Rakan, people like that, and you're dealing a lot of basic attacks, this is an item that will benefit you really well. Lulu works really well with Spear of Shojin because she has a high mana threshold on her ability. It's a good item. It's useful on a limited subset of units. And again, it works very specifically. Like with Lulu, it works very specifically for Lulu. It works well with Xin Zhao. It works well with... no, it doesn't work that well with Xin Zhao, actually. It works well with Rakan, though, for instance. It works well with Rakan. Star Guardian's Charm. Wearer is also a Star Guardian. Limited applications for this. I wouldn't really recommend it. There has been a couple of compositions where I found this to be useful. I I think it was the Celestial Protectors composition where I managed to make a Star Guardian charm for a Karma, and it made sense with like the Nico and the other Star Guardian, which I think was Soraka that I had on the field. But honestly, I wouldn't recommend ever trying to go for a spatula build with this. Static Shiv. Every third basic attack deals 85 magical damage to 3, 4, and 5 additional targets, scaling with your star level. Good on really high attack speed carries. So someone like Xayah, for instance, if you're running a Celestial composition, you're stacking your Xayah, this can be really good. It's not a bad item for Jinx. Like, I wouldn't say it's a fantastic item for Jinx, but it's not a bad item for Jinx either. Just think about anybody with really high attack speed could make use of this. And usually it has to be like a ranged backline carry. Swordbreaker. Attacks have a 25% chance to disarm for 3 seconds. It used to be so good, and I think in certain scenarios, it's an okay item. But I wouldn't recommend going for Swordbreaker unless you're going up against, and you know that you can attack the enemy carry really easily with this. But otherwise, like for instance, it was really good on a unit called Sivir in set 2 because her ricochets applied basic attacks. It can work with Runans, for instance. So a Swordbreaker Runans combo could be pretty solid on someone like Jinx, but you're taking up 2 item slots that could be better used elsewhere. Thief's Gloves. This item takes all 3 item slots, and on the round, begin, copy 2 random items. Thief's Gloves is good on a lot of units. It's basically, I don't know what to put on this unit, or I don't have the right items for this unit, so let's put Thief's Gloves on and roll the dice. I would say that Thief's Gloves are very adaptable. I wouldn't be out of the gate building Thief's Gloves, but it's like an adaptable item that could be used on many different units. Titan's Resolve. When the wearer is hit or inflicts a critical strike, they gain a 2% stacking damage bonus up to 100%. At 50 stacks, the wearer gains 25 armor and MR and increases in size. So, essentially, this is really good on a tank that deals damage. This is good for someone in protectors like Xin Zhao, who has already got a Bramble Vest and a Dragon's Claw and is going to be very tanky. It's good on a Mordekaiser who's going to heal from his ability. It's basically good for a tank that deals damage at the same time. So not very good for someone like Leona, not very good for someone like Malphite, but great for someone like Jace. It's actually pretty good for Jace because he's a Vanguard. And it's really good for someone like Mordekaiser and really good for someone like Xin Zhao. It's not that good for a backline carry like Kayle or Jinx because they're not going to deal critical strikes enough to make use of this, but it's very, very, very good scaling tank damage item. Trap Claw. On combat begin, gain a shield. When it breaks, stun the champion who broke the shield for 4 seconds. Usually it's the first ability. So whenever someone casts an ability on that target, it stuns the user. This is really good as a defensive item on your backline carries. I put this on a Jinx, I put this on a Kayle, I can even put this on a Misfortune. It's super good at basically shutting down a Shaco or a Kai'Sa who jump onto your backline. It's definitely not an optimal item for those item slots, but it is a good defensive item for your carries. Not very good on your front line. The reason it's not particularly good on your front line is that someone's going to break that like immediately, and it's often not going to be on a very effective target. But if it goes on a backline carry, usually it's going to be stunning someone who is like an infiltrator, which means it's pretty solid in that respect. Warmogs. User regenerates 6% of their maximum health per second. The more health you have, the better, obviously. So really, really good, and I think it has limited applications, but it's very good in a mech composition where the Garen has the combined health of all of the mechs, and so he regenerates a huge amount of health per second, making him very, very, very tanky. Very, very, very good in mech compositions. Maybe good on 3-star protectors, but other than that, I wouldn't say it has many other big applications. Zeke's Herald. At the start of combat, allies within the same row gain 15% attack speed for the rest of combat. Basically useless. I would never build this item. Zephyr. On the start of combat, banish an enemy for 7 seconds. And you've probably seen this. This is where the little tornado banishes a particular enemy based on where the unit holding Zephyr is positioned. So it basically mirrors the unit, the Zephyr position and knocks up the closest enemy to that unit positioning. This is a really good item. It's so good late game for locking down an individual carry. I think this is one of the best items in the game, just because of the utility that it offers. It's very, very strong. And Xerot Portal. When the wearer dies, construct arises to continue the fight. Not great. I use it if I've got these 2 items and I have nothing else to combine with them, or it's like the best item that I can get out of this situation. But it's not a great item. So hopefully that's every item explained and you kind of understand them a bit more. I know this has taken 30 minutes to do. Let's have a quick look at the tier list so we can talk a bit more about the items in general. So this is the TF Tactics tier list for items. And it's basically ranking components as well as completed items. So S tier, it's saying spatula. I actually Obviously, you always go for a spatula, but I actually don't know if there are many super useful spatula items in this meta. Like, there's nothing that, like, set 2, spatulas were insane. In this meta, I'm thinking, well, there are limited applications for spatulas. However, Force of Nature is a great item, so if you can get 2 of them, it's obviously always fantastic. But I would sometimes even forego a spatula on the carousel for another item that will get me a more impactful combination. I agree with all of this top row. Force of Nature gives you 1 extra unit. We've talked about Giant Slayer. It gives you 9% extra true damage based on the enemy's max health. GA is a very, very, it revives a unit, and it basically is very, very adaptable. Hand of Justice is adaptable as well, and a great carry item. Ionic Spark, I talked about it. It basically deals damage to enemies that are casting abilities in the vicinity of the unit carrying it, which is fantastic. Morellonomicon is great on a lot of carries. I wouldn't say it's S tier because there are, like, most of the carries that utilize this well are like Aurelion Soul, Gangplank, Misfortune, and there are actually not that many early game carries that I'm thinking, wow, Morellonomicon is broken on. I would give it to an Ahri, for instance. I think Ahri is a good carrier for Morellonomicon, but I don't think it, like, fits on so many carries where I'm thinking, wow. Vel'Koz, it goes well on Vel'Koz, for instance. Red buff is fantastic for backline carries. Seraphs is an incredibly good item, and so is Zephyr. So I actually really like this S tier ranking of these items. So if you are playing any kind of game, you want to look to aim for any of these S tier items for sure. I don't think I need to go through many other ones, but I would say that on A tier, you're looking at Deathblade, which has been moved up. Deathblade is definitely getting some more use in Jinx and Kayle based compositions. It's pretty good for Illusion as well, because he keeps himself alive with his kiting potential for so long. Thief's Gloves is obviously a fantastic item for a lot of units, and Titan's Resolve works on a lot of good tanky units. I would say that A and S tier is where you're aiming for. I actually think Bramble Vest is way better than B tier. I genuinely do. I think Bramble Vest is actually a really, really adaptable and good item and deals a lot of damage in an AoE area. I also think Runans and Rabadons are a bit better than they are suggesting. Like, I wouldn't sit there and think that Runans and Rabadons are as bad as, like, a Zeke's Herald, for instance. I do agree with the items in C and D tier, though. I think these items are all really bad. Anything from B and up is like an okay item to build, for instance. But you're looking to build items in S tier for the most part, because these are the most adaptable and most useful items that you can find. And they work in lots of different compositions, and they work for lots of different carries. So when you're looking to build an item, the S tier items that they've got listed here are pretty good. And I hope this helps. I hope this has been useful for any of my viewers that don't really understand items in TFT. I know it's a long video and I know it wasn't particularly interesting, but we went through the items and hopefully at the end of it you understand them a bit more. Oh, and if you like the content, feel free to like and subscribe. That'd be great.